Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Censor TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived back home Thursday morning after concluding his two-nation visit to Russia and Austria. As he headed to New Delhi following his Austria visit, the Prime Minister shared a post thanking the Chancellor of Austria, Karl Nehammer, the government and the people for their warm welcome and hospitality. He described his visit to Austria as historic and immensely productive, emphasizing that a new vigor has been added to the friendship between both countries. This was Prime Minister Modi's first official visit to Austria and that of an Indian Prime Minister after 41 years. So in the 2 days that he was there, the Prime Minister called on the President of Austria, Alexander Van der Bellen, who congratulated him on his historic third term in office. Besides, the Prime Minister also held bilateral discussions with the Australian Chancellor, following which both leaders emphasized that the shared values of democracy, freedom, international peace and security, a rules-based international order with the UN Charter at its core, the shared historical linkages and the long-standing ties between the two countries are at the center of the growing enhanced partnership. Besides, the Prime Minister also held a meeting with business leaders of both countries, and as is customary during his foreign visits, the Prime Minister addressed members of the Indian community who gave him a rousing reception. So that was a summary of the Prime Minister's engagement during his historic Austria visit. We'll now try and delve deeper into understanding the significance of this visit of the Prime Minister and how it adds a new chapter in the enhancement of ties between the two countries. And for this, I'm pleased to welcome on this edition of Perspective, former Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya. Delighted to have you with us on this edition of Perspective, Ambassador. And I'm also pleased to welcome Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor, glad to have you with us on the program as well. Thank you for your time. But before we begin with the discussion, a quick soundbite of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, wherein he describes this visit of Austria as a historic and immensely productive one. Listen.
Friends, भौगोलिक दृष्टि से तो भारत और ऑस्ट्रिया दो अलग-अलग छोर पर है, लेकिन हम दोनों के बीच अनेक समानताएं हैं। डेमोक्रेसी हम दोनों देशों को कनेक्ट करती है। लिबर्टी, इक्वालिटी, प्लुरलिज्म और रूल ऑफ लॉ का रिस्पेक्ट, ये हमारी शेयर्ड वैल्यूज है। हम दोनों समाज मल्टीकल्चरल और मल्टीलिंगुअल है। दोनों देश हमारे समाज में, हम दोनों देशों की आदत है डाइवर्सिटी को सेलिब्रेट करना, और हमारी इन वैल्यूज को रिफ्लेक्ट करने वाला एक बड़ा माध्यम चुनाव है। ऑस्ट्रिया में कुछ महीनों के बाद चुनाव होने वाला है, जबकि भारत में हमने अभी हमने लोकतंत्र का पर्व आन बान शान के साथ मनाया है। भारत में दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा चुनाव संपन्न हुआ है।
Okay, so you heard the Prime Minister speak to the Indian community, and therein he describes a lot of important events which mark the relations between India and Austria. Ambassador, coming to you first, your thoughts on this visit of the Prime Minister to Austria. It's the first by an Indian Prime Minister in 41 years and in a year that marks 75 years of diplomatic ties between India and Austria.
Absolutely, Tina. It's a time for celebration as we mark the 75th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. And let us not forget that right from the beginning, India was very actively involved in several issues related to Austria's existence after the Second World War. From my perspective, there are two broad ideas behind this extremely important visit. The first, of course, is to strengthen and consolidate our bilateral cooperation. As you know, Austria is a very advanced country, and we hope to seek greater economic, technological relations with the Austrian side. And so that was obviously the key focus of Prime Minister's visit to Vienna. The second focus, which in my mind is not any less important, was the issue of signaling. Because we are embarking in a very fragile and volatile geopolitical arena. And in this, India is going to be playing an increasingly important role. Austria has a very special place in Europe. It is a member of the European Union, but it is not a member of NATO. At the same time, it has very close relations with the Western partners. And so when Prime Minister visits Austria after his visit to Moscow, there is a certain signaling as well that comes about India's willingness to play an active role in diplomacy and in dialogue and in bringing about peace and ending the era of war.
Okay, so taking forward the point of signaling that this visit of the Prime Minister to Austria marks, Professor Sachdeva, I would like your views on how you look at this visit of the Prime Minister that comes close on the heels of his visit to Moscow first, and in context of the Prime Minister reiterating that India has always stood for peace, and when he said that India has given to the world Buddh, not Yudh.
Well, thank you. Just following what Ambassador started, I think the visit to Austria, there are, I think, 3 or 4 takeaways if I can look at. One is, I think there is a question sometimes comes to your mind that why Austria? There are so many countries within EU and, there's some small countries, some landlocked country, somewhere in the middle of Europe. What exactly this is for us?
Okay.
As Ambassador was mentioning, Austria from the very establishment in 1955, it has been playing a very important role within European politics because the way it was established as a neutral country within Europe. So even during the Cold War, if you look at leaders, particularly the social democrat leaders like Bruno Kreisky in Austria, along with Chancellor Willy Brandt in Germany and the Prime Minister Olof Palme of Sweden, they played very, very important role bringing certain kind of sanity between East and West, that, the tension, reducing tension between, both East and West during that period of time. So now even, as Ambassador mentioned, this is a member of the EU, but not member of the NATO. Even EU membership, actually, they took very late in 1995. So broadly, yes, since they are member of the EU, their broader economic and foreign policies are very much aligned with the EU. At the same time, they do have a certain independent view. And particularly when, coming from Moscow, when Prime Minister, they would like to, Europeans would like to hear what exactly we had discussions in Moscow, because, today, for all the European countries, this is the major strategic challenge and the war which is going on in Europe. So that was one, I think, the signaling what Ambassador said. And the second thing is about bilateral relations. Now, even if I think the Prime Minister is visiting after 41 years, as our secretary yesterday during the press briefing mentioned, that, it's not that we have abandoned, Austria for all those years. A lot of things were happening, even if the Prime Minister visit is taking place now. So now we have clearly identified, I think, 2 areas. One is technology partnership, where, you can look into different areas because, they have a different ecosystem, a very prosperous country, very, very science and technology oriented country. So you look at renewables, you look at artificial intelligence, you look at startup, you look at urbanization, you look at tourism management, you look at any area. So how we can really take advantage of different ecosystems, what they have in Austria and in India, and then really pick on from there and make it bigger. Our trade is still only about 3 billion and their investment is only about 500, 600 million in India, but large number of Austrian companies are active in India. So there is a plenty of things which can be actually, improved from this. And then the second thing which has happened, I mean, we already had an agreement on migration and mobility. More than 30,000 Indians are already living there. And they are quite keen to actually attract, skilled labor from India. So that's one area again where I think certain things can happen in the coming years. And the third point is that, this was again came out very clearly since they are member of the EU. So many of those areas we have to work with the European Union, and that will automatically will translate, positive things for Austria as well. Whether we are looking at India-EU free trade agreement or our connectivity partnership or EU's engagement in the Indo-Pacific. So whatever we are doing, in fact, more, a very robust relationship we have now with the European Union. More than, 40 plus dialogues are happening and different ways things are happening. So automatically that is also going to affect Austria as well. And the third point is about Ukraine. I mean, this has come again and again. And our perceptions obviously very, very different than the European perceptions, and we can discuss, why they are and how the
sure. We'll come to that in we'll come to that in another round, Professor. But since we're talking about the economic cooperation, I'll go back to the ambassador and understand from him how this visit has proved to be fruitful in expanding the economic cooperation, ambassador. Because as both of you rightly said, Austria happens to be one of the richest countries in the region, in Europe, an important link for India in maintaining also its relationship with Europe, particularly with countries of Central and Eastern Europe. So in that context, how fruitful has this visit been in enhancing the economic cooperation between India and Austria, Ambassador?
I think that was perhaps the key focus of the bilateral exchanges to develop further on our economic cooperation. Prime Minister has often emphasized that in this era of transformation, technology will play an increasingly important role. And Austria is a huge technology provider, not only in terms of new technologies that are coming about in data, in artificial intelligence, but also in terms of innovations. We already have an innovation bridge that has been established between India and Austria. Startups will start collaborating between each other, because one of the most difficult things for a startup is when it tries to scale across boundaries. And when we experience the habits of European countries, it becomes much easier and the learning curve becomes better. The second key idea that Prime Minister focused on, and this was emphasized very strongly when he met with the Austrian CEOs, was the idea of Make in India and a range of incentives, including the PLI that is being provided. So Austrian investments can come into India, and this would be a growing market. India is today the fastest growing major economy in the world. We are becoming part of global supply chains, and therefore what will happen is that Austrian companies will benefit from scale emerging out of Indian investments. And also there would be tremendous opportunities for research and development in many specific areas. The third area in the economic sphere was to look at new energy, renewable energy resources. And Prime Minister had very extensive discussions. And in fact, if you look at the joint statement on enhanced partnership, it carries mention of many of them as well, about wind, about solar, about hydrogen, which is another area in which Austria has done extremely well. There's a very strong commitment towards climate change, which is related to this area of energy transition. And so that was the third key area. The fourth and final key area that I would like to mention on the economic front is what Professor has already touched upon, which is about the mobility arrangements. You know, the WTO is in a bind. The WTO, the World Trade Organization, is actually supposed to enhance mobility, but it's been caught in several issues. But what we've been able to do through the Common Agenda on Migration and Mobility, which we did with the Europeans was that we were able to bring about many mobility and migration partnership agreements with several European countries, including with Austria. And that will bring about the infusion of talent, new skills, new age jobs, which we need in our economy, and Austria and India will both benefit from this. And finally, to round up, I think this is also a word to our European partners in Brussels, in the EU, saying that, we need to really hurry up on the FTA between India and EU. We recently did the FTA with the EFTA countries, which is with Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Norway. But we need to still do this with the European Union. And the encouragement that Austria and other European partners can do would be extremely important.
Certainly. So a lot of potential as far as upgrading this relationship is concerned between India and Austria, and ways to explore how this can be expanded was discussed at length. Professor, interestingly, I was going through this MEA document, and what caught my attention was the space partnership that we've had with Austria. The two satellites, that Austria's first two satellites, the TugSat-1 Bright and Unibright, were launched by India's PSLV C-20 from Sriharikota back in 2013. So if I may understand from you how this collaboration happened and whether we have been able to make further progress, considering the fact that India's space sojourn of late has been a huge success. So have we been able to build on that kind of cooperation with Austria?
No, in fact, in many areas, because, as, I think we have been discussing that, in so many areas, space, nuclear, where in fact, Austrian companies are very, very advanced. At the same time, they also have a different, I would say, the politics in Austria. Like if you look at the nuclear, they built nuclear power plants in the 70s. And then there was a referendum and countries said no. And since then, that particular nuclear power plant is still just being used by research and other kind of activities, and even certain cultural activities rather than actually nuclear power. So, a different kind of politics, but at the same time, very much oriented, very much focused on high-tech research. Whether you look at space, you look at nuclear, you look at digitization, you look at... So all those areas, and particularly the infrastructure development, and many of those companies, including in space, as you mentioned, we have been collaborating with them, and there is a plenty of scope where we can actually work with many of those Austrian companies. And still, I think there's a plenty of things can be done, so long as, even if, some other smaller countries in Europe, you can see, their investment in India is much bigger than what the Austrian investment here is. And we also have large Indian diaspora in Austria as well. So but we also have to keep in mind that, that there are clear-cut competencies within the European Union. In certain areas, we really, as Ambassador mentioned, we have to move forward quickly, ambitiously on areas like on free trade and on investment agreement. Because once those things are done, some of those, like in the IT sector, data exclusivity, and mobility or short-term mobility of Indian professionals, etc. Once those things are settled at the EU level, many of the Indian and Austrian companies will be able to take advantage immediately.
Professor, another focus, and as the Ambassador rightly mentioned also, was sustainability, how both countries must engage further on reducing the risks of climate change. So in the context of the Austrian government's hydrogen strategy and India's national green hydrogen mission, what is the scope for engagement that you see, especially when we are at a time when energy transition takes focus for a country like India?
Well, climate change, energy is a big thing in Europe, and but we also have to keep in mind that energy transition is happening in Europe. Energy transition is also happening in India, but these are two different energy transitions.
Right.
We are building up our capacity, our demand is growing up, and we are building up capacity in almost every area, including in nuclear and in others, and we are not going to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, in the foreseeable future. In Europe, energy transition is happening because they already had a lot of fossil fuel use before, and now they are moving very quickly towards renewables, and particularly after Ukraine war, when they moved away from Russian energy, or they are trying to move away from Russian energy. So that transition has even accelerated. So those are different transitions, but definitely they have built a lot of capacities, and they are willing to share those capacities with the partners, and there is plenty of scope. Where we have already been working with all different European countries, including with the EU institutions and with individual countries, and all of them are actually doing different kind of experiments on renewables and also on the green energy. At the same time, in fact, it's not just only about energy transition. If you look at any European country, they also looking at basically all the new processes, all the new industries, all the new automobiles, which will come as a result of this energy transition. If companies in Europe are important players today in automobiles, they feel that after 10 years, things are going to be very, very different, and they have to be leader in this. And so in different countries, look at Germany, look at Austria, look at Spain, look at other countries, the kind of urbanization, the kind of building, the kind of processes which are happening. So there is a plenty of scope, I think, for India and the European countries, including Austria, to work together. And we have already built so many partnerships here, and particularly in the context of Austria. Clearly, as I was mentioning, and Ambassador has mentioned earlier, we have identified areas on the technology partnership. And all these technologies, they have a cutting edge technology, and we have our own ecosystem. We are also very good in certain technologies, but we also provide certain bigger scale. So this is what scope, I think, for us and Austria are together to build on this.
Right. So bound by shared values like democracy, liberty, and the commitment towards a greener planet is something that we've spoken about. Ambassador, how are we bound by cultural relations? And I ask you this because the Austrian rendition of Vande Mataram has been a huge hit, something that's been appreciated by the Prime Minister himself. Help us understand, and for the benefit of our viewers, how are we historically connected, and how have we expanded the cultural cooperation with Austria?
So, I think the kind of connect that we have between India and Europe at large, in terms of the understanding of our civilization and heritage, is actually quite deep. Many of the oldest institutions that studied our old Sanskrit texts were from Europe. There has been a very strong tradition of the study of Indology in Austria. And according to, as a fallout of that particular habit, we see that there is a very strong and marked cultural impact over there, which is not only in terms of our music, classical music and dance, but also in terms of yoga, the practice of Ayurveda, and a better appreciation of things that are India. India is definitely the flavor in countries like Austria today. And over a period of time, with the increased influx of Indians coming in to work, mostly as professionals in Austria, they are highly valued. And they have brought with them their own nature and their culture and values, which have impressed the Austrians very much. As you know, the Austrians are a somewhat conservative society in terms of they are very traditional in their approach. And I think that reflects in a lot of things that they do. So when they are in academics, the depth to which they go in studying Indology, and Prime Minister met with a group of Indologists while he was in Vienna as well, very celebrated Indologists. Some of the initiatives of the Indian government have found appeal, whether it is the International Day of Yoga, which is celebrated very widely across Austria, or the rendition of our national anthem, or the tributes to Mahatma Gandhi, which were penned by luminaries from the Austrian polity and academics. There is a great interest in India. I wanted to get back to one more aspect about Austria,
Sure.
is that Austria is actually a country which has niche technologies. And I think that is something that is extremely important as we try and develop global supply chains. And Prime Minister emphasized that aspect. So when we are looking at the transition towards a green economy or a greener planet, these ideas, these technologies will be very, very important because they move away from the relatively more rapacious technologies of the past. And when you blend them with the ideas of the heritage of the Indian culture and civilization, that is the perfect blend, because technology by itself can always be in a vacuum unless it has a strong ideological basis. And that is what Indian culture and civilization does to it. And I think the Austrians appreciate that very much.
Perhaps this is what has bound us also over the past 75 years. So it's been a milestone journey for the diplomatic relationship between India and Austria, and making it more special was the Prime Minister's maiden visit to the country. The most interesting aspect is that both leaders recognized, the Austrian Chancellor and Prime Minister Modi, the potential of taking this relationship forward. So we've discussed with the guests the areas, the newer area in which we will see this relationship evolving to newer heights. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of Perspective. I'd like to thank both my guests once again for joining us on the program and sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now with another topic and another set of panelists. Until then, take good care of yourselves and keep watching Sunset TV.